Okay, welcome back to part two, major battles and figures of the Civil War. We're going to talk about quite a bit in this second part, so let's get underway. And this will include the journal topic for week 8. All right. So as the war goes on, the Confederacy encounters more and more issues. For one thing, they had been attempting to fight a war of attrition, and now the war of attrition was really hurting them. They were the ones that were having trouble keeping going. They were the ones that were having trouble finding enough men. Lack of soldiers was a real problem. They didn't even have a draft until late in the war. The Confederate government was modeled after the Articles of Confederation, and so the states didn't have to do anything they didn't want to do. Eventually, they do pass 3 years of military service for all white males ages 18 to 35, but by that point, they're actually having to try and find even older men to serve simply because they just don't have enough young men. They did allow the army to conscript slaves as laborers, but again, they seem to have an issue with giving enslaved people guns and saying, "Follow me into battle." that I think even they realized that was probably not a great idea. States' rights were a real issue. Again, the states didn't have to do anything they didn't want to do in the Confederacy. And for one thing, every state could print money. That was a huge problem. Massive inflation and economic problems because every state could print money. Even Jefferson Davis thought that the Confederate government really needed to be amended, and it really needed to be modeled more after the Union, simply because this states' rights thing just didn't lead to a very strong government. They also couldn't find a European nation to be their benefactor, to be their France. In other words, when the American colonies got independence, they had the backing of France and also, to a certain extent, Spain. They couldn't attract a European country to come in and join the fight. I don't know if that was because they couldn't impress one, or because the European countries just felt that this was a civil war, that it wasn't the same thing as the American Revolution. The Union also had issues. As the British were kind of playing footsie with the Confederacy, that certainly didn't help with relations with the Union. So they were having diplomatic issues with Britain. The Union was also having economic issues. They had to increase their tariffs, their taxes on imports, which nobody likes increased taxes. They had to put an income tax on for the first time in American history. First progressive income tax. The progressive income tax has been around since Lincoln. And we all know FICO's a bad dog that eats our paychecks. So that's obviously not very popular. They were, again, just as the Confederacy was, they were printing paper money with no gold backing. Now, the Union didn't have nearly as bad a inflation problem as the Confederacy, simply because only the national government could print money. But it was still an inflation problem, but not nearly as bad. The Union was having draft riots after Gettysburg, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to Gettysburg. And they also had these groups, these Copperhead groups, that were the stated purpose was to get the Union to lose the war, or at least to settle the war. So these guys would do things like write to soldiers and encourage them to desert the army. They would encourage draftees not to report. They would try to sabotage weapons shipments and things like that. I mean, there was a lot of internal division within the Union, and a lot of groups that didn't want to see the Union succeed. You also have Abraham Lincoln being portrayed largely as a tyrant, because Lincoln was exercising powers that no chief executive had ever exercised before, and doing so with the explanation that this was time of war. And I'll let you decide if these were okay. He arrested disloyal members of the Maryland legislature so that they wouldn't secede. He declared martial law in Kentucky so that they wouldn't secede. That's ruled by the military. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which allowed people to be held in jail without trial, without charge, and without, yeah, I mean, that's something, that's like a bedrock thing in America. And presidents after Lincoln have done the same thing. Is that okay? 13,000 Americans were jailed without charge during the Civil War. That's a lot. Government seized telegraph lines. I mean, the telegraph lines technically belonged to the railroads. And the government basically said, no, these are ours now. Well, the railroad company and the telegraph companies. And the government said, no, these are ours now. These are being used for public benefit now, at least during the war. You know, is that okay? Government has seized production after that, during World War II, certainly, and during World War I. Again, would that have happened without Lincoln doing it first? You couldn't print any news about military movements or about the war without having it approved by the military and by the government. You know, that's a real violation of journalistic freedom. Was that okay in time of war? Think about it this way. Let's fast forward. We've been in the war on terror for 22 years. Is it still okay that we have to take our shoes off at the airport, that the TSA gets to search our bags, that they get to go through our skivvies at the, you know, in the airports? Is that an okay thing? That's something you guys get to decide coming up. You're coming up to being 18, and that's stuff that's on a ballot every year, depending on who you support. So, yeah, stuff that you want to think about. So anyway, yeah, that's something that Lincoln, to this day, historians kind of debate about. Did Lincoln take too much power here? Is that okay? Did the future presidents kind of key off Abraham Lincoln as to how much power to take during time of war? Did they use war as an excuse to basically take more power? So Battle of Gettysburg, this is the one that if you know anything about the Civil War, you probably know about the Battle of Gettysburg. I kind of think of it as like the Super Bowl of the Civil War, except it's not the last battle, so it's not a perfect metaphor. But in any case, this is the second and final time Lee is going to try attacking in the north. He gets all the way up to Pennsylvania. He was hoping to scare New York City, which he does actually. There will be draft riots as a result of the Battle of Gettysburg and the amount of casualties. They'll actually have to call in soldiers from Gettysburg to put down the draft riots in New York City, which, you know, is not great given that a lot of those guys were pretty bloodied up. It was a 3-day battle between July 1st and July 3rd. By July 4th, Lee was retreating for home. 28,000 Confederate casualties out of 75,000 men, 23,000 Union casualties out of 85,000. So 50,000 casualties, bloodiest battle of the Civil War. And Lee again escapes despite the fact that General Meade was ordered to go after Lee. He misses the opportunity. And again, had Lee been captured, the war would have been over a lot sooner. Back on the Mississippi, down on the Mississippi, we have Vicksburg. So Vicksburg was the last holdout city on the Mississippi. So 1863, Grant is going to lay siege to Vicksburg, basically surround it with cannons. He had tried several assaults, like frontal assaults, and those had been rebuffed. So ultimately, he's just going to set up cannons and just start firing into the city, cut off supply lines into the city. Eventually, they are going to be starved out. So by the end of 1863, the Union is now winning the war. They have 2 of their 3 objectives met. They have blockaded the Atlantic coast. We aren't really talking about that because the Navy was just doing it. It was just handled. And now they control the Mississippi River. They've cut the Confederacy in 2. So Grant's the only commander that's getting anything done really on the ground in any major way consistently. So Lincoln, at the end of 1863, is going to call upon Grant to come to the east and take over basically the entire war. So Grant is going to get to name his successor in the west, and he names William Tecumseh Sherman as the commanding general in the west, and he's going to charge Sherman. He's going to say, start in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and lay waste to the south. And that's exactly what Sherman's going to do. This is known as Sherman's March to the Sea. He is going to basically destroy the state of Georgia. Well, he and the Confederate Army. The Confederate Army is going to move ahead of Sherman's army and destroy things before the Union Army can get there. The picture on your screens, that is a picture of Atlanta after Sherman has gone through. I mean, it is completely destroyed. Sherman's going to make it to Savannah, Georgia. He spares the city of Savannah, so if you want to see pre-Civil War architecture, you got to go to Savannah, Georgia. He's then going to turn and move up the coast. As he moves up through the Carolinas, he's going to start dividing up plantations amongst the newly freed African Americans that are there. He's going to divide them into 40-acre plots and grant these folks access to decommissioned military supplies like mules. This is where the expression 40 acres and a mule comes from. What you notice when you see the pictures of the destruction, and I'm not sure what city that is, that shouldn't have happened, what city that is, what's interesting to note is that it looks very similar to like Berlin at the end of World War II, except there was no aerial bombardment. This was all cannon fire and just fire that did this, and that's the kind of destruction that is wreaked. This is a picture where they literally pushed all the trains together and then tore up the tracks so that they couldn't be used anymore. So thanks to Sherman's destruction of Georgia and the Carolinas, Abraham Lincoln is going to handily win re-election in 1864. Had that not happened, his opponent, George McClellan, former general, probably would have done a lot better. McClellan, prior to Sherman's March to the Sea, McClellan was doing pretty well, and most people thought he was going to win and negotiate a settlement with the South. But when Sherman pretty much destroyed Georgia, the American public kind of said, well, the end is near. The end of the war is near. We're just going to stay the course as opposed to trying to settle at this point. So you can see on the map that Lincoln wins nearly every state. McClellan gets Kentucky for some reason. New Jersey was actually McClellan's home state, and Delaware. I'm not sure what happened in Delaware. But in any case, Grant is now surrounding Richmond, and Sherman's moving up the coast. The end is basically near here. And so by April of 1865, Lee realizes that he doesn't have any more rabbits in the hat, no more tricks up his sleeve. He just doesn't have it. So he is going to surrender at the town of Appomattox Courthouse. Yes, that was the name of the town, Appomattox Courthouse. We can just chalk that up to the South having weird town names. April 9th, 1865. And then a couple of weeks later, June 23rd, 1865, the last Confederate army will surrender. That is an army of the Cherokee, commanded by General Stand Watie, who you see there on your screen. He is the last Confederate general to surrendering June 23rd, 1865. This is a lovely painting of Lee surrendering to Grant. Amongst the crowd behind Grant, and I can't pick them out exactly, but actually I think I can. I think, the one I can't. Lincoln's son is there. He joined the military in the waning days of the war, and Lincoln used his authority as commander-in-chief to get him assigned as an assistant to Grant. That was really at the behest of Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, who was, let's just say, a very scary woman. And so he didn't want to tick off Mary Todd any more than he already had. So, his son was basically put in the safest job that could be located for a new recruit, and that was running messages for Grant. The other guy that's there, and I think he's on the very far side of that picture, the very far left side, he was given a battlefield command promotion to general, but afterwards he will just be a colonel, and that is George Armstrong Custer. Custer was actually present at the surrender of Lee at the end of the Civil War, prior to Custer coming to the West and fighting at Little Bighorn and dying. So anyway, just thought I would throw that in there in Mr. Rosenleaf's House of Useless Knowledge. Okay, so about a week later, Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, President Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd, will be attending a production at Ford's Theater. The production was called Our American Cousin. And into the theater will stroll the prominent actor John Wilkes Booth. No one thinks anything of this. He comes in backstage. He's not part of the production, but he was an actor, so nobody really pays any mind to him being there. He gets around to the front of the house. He goes up the back stairs, and he will go into the presidential box. He will bar the door using the chair. He will approach President Lincoln. He will take a pistol from his coat pocket. He will aim it at the back of the president's head and fire. In the commotion, he will tussle with a military officer, Major Rathbone, who was in the box. He will punch out Major Rathbone. He will jump onto the railing, and he will jump onto the stage. He breaks his leg in the process. He will stand up, seemingly on sheer adrenaline. I can't imagine if I broke my leg, I'd just be laying there. But he stands up. He holds the gun over his head. Some people say it was a knife, but in any case, he holds either the gun or a knife above his head and yells out, "Sic Semper Tyrannis," which was the state motto of Virginia, which is an allusion to the death of Julius Caesar. And of course, when you want to make a point about killing the president and comparing it to Julius Caesar, you certainly want to speak Latin, because Americans understand Latin so well. In any case, Booth limps off the stage, makes it to the backstage door, gets on a horse, rides into Maryland, where he has his legs set by a doctor named Samuel Mudd. Mudd will be charged with treason, and that is actually the origin of the expression, "his name is Mudd." Mudd will eventually be pardoned, but for a time he was a traitor to the United States, even though he was a doctor and had no choice in setting the leg. He did not know what Booth had done. He did not know who Booth was. Booth ends up in Virginia. He ends up in a farmer's barn. They do eventually find him after, I think, about 2-3 weeks. And they set fire. The Union Army sets fire to the barn. They shoot Booth. They drag him out. He dies on the farmer's porch, begging for water, by the way. Lincoln is taken to a boarding house across the street from Ford's Theater, where he dies the next morning. This plot also included the attempt to kill the Vice President, Andrew Johnson. The assassin that was charged with killing Johnson chickens out. He gets drunk in a hotel bar and doesn't do anything. And also killing the Secretary of State, William Seward. Seward actually was butchered to within an inch of his life that evening by the assassin. He was unsuccessful in actually killing Seward. Seward does live, but he's pretty messed up for the rest of his life. He does continue to serve as Secretary of State, though. So, in any case, that's what ends up happening there. This is a lovely charcoal rendering of Lincoln being shot in the back of the head. Mary Todd looks pretty good in that picture. I don't know what she's doing with the hand there. No, stop. She doesn't look alarmed. Anyway, 3 pictures here. The first one, that is Lincoln's casket laying in state in the Capitol building. Second one, that is Lincoln's funeral procession through Washington, D.C. If you look very closely at one of the top windows at one of those boarding houses, you'll actually see Lincoln's young son looking out. And then finally, that is one of the coaches used to carry Lincoln's casket to the train that takes him back to Springfield, where Lincoln's body is ultimately interred. Okay, there we go. That is the end of that. And as promised, your journal topic for week 8. In your opinion, would the Union have won the war had Lincoln kept Grant in the West and McClellan or Meade as commanders in the East? Why or why not? So please answer that question in the journal assignment that is below this video. Thank you so much for your attention. Have a great day.